And Then What?
And Then What?
And Then What podcast.
Hello, everybody. How you all doing? I'll try that again. Hello, everybody. How you all doing? Welcome to a very special live recording of And Then What? The podcast where journalism's impact takes center stage. And I am so excited to launch this podcast here in Nairobi, Kenya, because for the folks who know me, Nairobi is my home. It is where I have my people. So thank you for being here. I'm going to call up my guests for today's episode. Tabitha Griffiths, an incredible human rights activist and lawyer. Tabitha, please join us on stage. Woo! That's part of the celebration. We need some more commotion for Tabitha as she joins us on stage. Welcome, Tabs. Welcome, Tabitha. I'd also like to welcome Njeri Wa Migwi, another incredible activist from right here in Kenya. Njeri. Yes. We need some more applause as Njeri makes her way. Welcome, Njeri. And you met one of my key collaborators. On this podcast already. He's going to join us in conversation. I didn't want Immanuel to just stay behind the cameras where he's most comfortable. Immanuel, join us on stage. Welcome, everybody. How you all doing? And you're looking, yes, use your mics. You're all looking gorgeous.
Thank you.
Immanuel.
I took that. I'm going to use it.
And so today we're going to be talking about collaborating for good. How journalists and activists can maximize social impact. And I really want to start with getting us to know a little bit about the wonderful people we have here on the stage. So we're going to do a round of questions. I'm going to start with you, Tabitha, and ask if you could tell us a little bit about your work as a human rights lawyer and an advocate for marginalized communities.
Which camera is... Where are the people, the online, the Gen Zs?
Over there.
Right? Hi, everybody. My name is Saoyo Tabitha Griffiths. Tabs or Tabitha is the easiest. I am a lawyer by profession, a teacher by calling. I am an activist just like Nana. And for the last 13 years, since moving from corporate law, I have activated my heart in academia, in courts, on issues to do with access to safe abortion. So these are the things maybe in a Kenyan scenario we call the hard issues, the issues that a lot of people are not comfortable discussing. So this is access to safe abortion, forced and coerced sterilization of women living with HIV, trafficking of young girls. I've worked on sexual and gender-based violence. So the hug that you saw, this was a reunion of comrades who have shared a lot of unfortunate moments with Njeri. So it's not always that I sit here with Njeri in pleasant circumstances where we are promised food and drinks after. In most instances, it's one of us calling the other to say, I have a girl who has been raped. I need a P3 form filled. I need a safe house. I have a queer person who needs help immediately. Njeri, run. So that's Tabitha in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Tabitha. Welcome, and thanks for being here. I'm coming to you next, Njeri. It's good to know, you share comradeship with Tabitha. Can you tell us about your own journey in founding UCKimie and about the impact it's had?
Well, you've come in hot, huh? My name is Njeri Wa Migwi. I am the co-founder and executive director of an organization called Usikimie. Usikimie is Swahili for Do Not Be Silent, because one of the things and the course that we take is around gender-based violence. And as you know, people do not like talking about gender-based violence. It's a stigmatized topic, it's a taboo topic. We are uncomfortable. And already Kenyans are not comfortable with sexuality. Now imagine the things they do when all these things are mentioned. I felt like Tab said a lot of important things. What has the impact that Usikimie has had? One, in 2019 when we started Usikimie, and we did our very, very first rescue, I remember calling people. Actually, I texted on Facebook and asked people, hey, does anybody know anyone who has a safe house? And everybody was directing me to children homes. And you know, I had read online, because this wasn't my journey, this wasn't my course, this was just something I particularly took up because I felt it was an important cause, an important conversation. It was coming right at the heels of the femicides that were happening in 2019 in Kenya, and especially after the death of Dr. Ivy Wangeshi. And so when I am asking people, because everybody is saying, hey, you know, the end of it all, you take the person to the police, you take the person to hospital, then you take them to the safe house. This woman had been thrown out of her house in first floor, and so she was hurt and she really needed somewhere to go. And nobody even knew what a safe house was online. And I realized, hiya, okay, so now where do I take this woman, the survivor? And so I took her to my house. And I realized we needed to have a conversation around safe houses. And then 2020 came and COVID happened. And everything went right to, what's the worst place? Hell. And everybody was just doing the most. And so for us, the calls started coming in, and I had no choice but to open a safe house. Literally had to open a safe house, didn't know what to do, didn't know how to run one. And that is how our journey started. It just started like, it wasn't supposed to be that serious, but it became really serious in a very short span of time. And so we run 3 safe houses right now, 2 an emergency shelter, 1 for gender-based violence, and 1 for queer people. That we don't talk about that. Sindio, Kenyans? Yeah, so, right, so we run 3 shelters, let's just say 3 shelters. Right, and then based on that, we receive a lot of cases. Some come from hospitals, some come from the police. We had to move our shelter this year because the police found out where our shelter was, and so what they would do is they would come and just drop survivors at our gate and go, just dump them. You know, no notice, no nothing. They know the shelter is there, so we just see a police car. They don't even bother coming in. They just leave the survivor at the gate. And I was like, you know what? We are not doing this. So we've moved the shelter again. It's obviously it's outside Nairobi. We don't say where the shelter is for purposes of the safety of the survivors in the shelter. Yeah, so I think that is a big thing. That's a big step. Just running a shelter, unfunded, making sure people in that safe house eat, have clothes, have therapy, get to get their life together for the time they're in the safe house. We have, how many? 7 teenagers right now, who we've had for 4 years, who are now almost finishing their secondary schools. They were defiled by their parents and by their fathers and their stepfathers. And their mothers said, don't come back home. And the court, they didn't have anywhere else to go. And so we've had them. And for that long, I think that for me is commendable impact, because Jennifer is finishing her high school this year. She's sitting for her exams. Someone else is going to college, and so on and so forth. So I feel like those are very tangible impact stories. Okay, the other thing we do is we run a feeding program. We've done that. This is our 5th year doing that. And I know many people are like, what has that got to do with gender-based violence? We are in the low-income areas, and in the low-income areas, children are mostly lured by food. And so for us to end gender-based violence was to start giving children food. From where we were receiving very many cases, we would get up to 15, 20 cases a month. We are down to sometimes none, or sometimes 1 at the most. So I feel like all that is impact, and I know you don't want to clap, but imagine hold those hands together. Hey, right, like, yes, see, it works. No, but you do this. Anyway, yeah, so, and a few other mini stories that are there.
Thank you for the work that you do. It's amazing. It's amazing and much needed work. Thank you so much. Immanuel, I'm going to come to you. You've worked on a number of productions which centers addressing stories around human rights, around social justice. How do you pick the productions you work on? And yes, what's been your experience as a journalist working on human rights issues?
Thank you, Nana. First to say, I always wanted to be a journalist, and I always wanted to study journalism. I actually hoped I would be a host or a presenter. But when I started journalism, I realized there's way more to journalism. And I realized a lot of what goes into journalism happens behind the scenes. And that's when I decided to become a producer. But something else happened when I decided to become a producer. I started working with a lot of international media houses, local media houses, to help them frame their news, to help them get sources for their work, for their documentaries, and stuff like that. And that's how I got to doing the stories I do about social impact and about human rights. A lot of the work I do is with international broadcast houses, media houses, coming to Kenya, coming to Africa to come and tell stories, and they need insight, and they need knowledge on who to talk to, where to go, and how to frame the stories. And when I was getting into this art, it was very different and very difficult, because a lot of the stories we'd see on the news, on CNN, on BBC, on Al Jazeera, had a very negative framing of Africa. And once I got onto this scene, I noticed like it's up to me as a young person to make sure that what's represented here is accurate and represents Africa and Kenya in the most beautiful light, because it's a beautiful place, Africa, and beautiful people. So that's how I started getting into that. And over time, I had really good networks with communities, because as a fixer, that's your first stop. You have to go talk to the communities. You have to go to actually find out what's going on there. So I was in a place where I was put at the forefront of what's going on with these people. I was able to really understand what's going on ground, but not only that, but to represent that to journalists who want to report these matters, but necessarily don't have the insight. And that's how all that started. We've covered protests, we've covered investigations that have gone on to be in the Kenyan parliament, in the UK parliament, and that made me see how important it is as a producer and as someone in the back end to make sure that you're representing factual information. And that is the only way you can fight for human rights abuses, and you can fight for social issues, because a lot of the time in the media, these issues are either underreported or reported with an angle where people want something. So that's me.
Love it, love it. I'm coming back to you, Tabitha. Can you tell me about your experience of working with the media, if you have experience of working with the media? How's that gone for you so far?
Which camera is going to NTV? I'm going to keep my answers very short, because again, I recognize that it's late, the energies are a little bit low, but also because I think there was an announcement on food and drinks. And I might be standing between you and food and drinks. So when I stopped being a corporate lawyer, the first case that I ever handled was an abortion case of a young girl who had been arrested in Mathare slums. Those who are Kenyans here, you'd know where Mathare is. This girl had been arrested on Friday, and the story had been run on Citizen TV of this young girl being frog-marched from where she had procured the unsafe abortion with a basin on her head all the way to the chief's camp. This was my first interaction with both unsafe abortion and how it was being reported, right? On Monday, community activists, back then I was working for FIDA, community activists came to the office. I was the first one in the office. I was an eager beaver back then. I really believed in the cause, so I used to go to work at 6:30 in the morning. And because I was the first one in the office, when the community activists came in, they then asked, can we get help? We need a lawyer to go to the police station with us. This girl, remember, the story was reported on Friday. This was on Monday. She had been at Muthaiga police station bleeding from Friday. When Nana asks what is my interaction with the media, the first thing is that every story on abortion has been always portrayed through two images by the media. It's either a full-term pregnancy, right? If you think about any caption on the media around abortion, or a fetus with, are they called angelic wings, right? Which is a lot of guilt tripping of women and demonizing the issue. So I've worked on an issue where I've had to do a lot of unlearning personally, and also teaching editors and photo editors around, is there an alternative image that you can use to bring out this sensitive topic on abortion without necessarily capturing it through a full-term pregnancy? Because half of the time, those unsafe abortions are not happening at 9 months. No, I promise you, they're not, right? It's been a space where some media houses have been very generous with covering the stories. Some others have been judgmental. So it's been a mix of both, right? And this circles all back to, and then what? The story was reported on Friday. Nobody bothered to find out what had happened to this girl after she was frog-matched with her basin, which had the fetus in, right? And then what? Half of the stories that we get and half of the cases that I have done have been cases that if the media had just gone just a little bit to come back to the police station and ask, by the way, there was this little girl who we reported was, had had an unsafe abortion, and we reported that she had been frog-matched to Muthaiga. What happened to her? It would have made a difference in how the police had handled that girl, because they would have known that there's somebody doing the and then what, right? It took the intervention, just for you to know how this case ended, it took the intervention of the magistrate at Makadara Court. As we walked into court, the girl was still bleeding. It took the magistrate to note that she was still holding on to her skirt and she still was bleeding, for him to say, I cannot let her take plea in the circumstances that she's in. Take her to Mama Lucy, let her get post-abortion care, and then you'll bring her back for plea taking, right? So just to answer you, it's been moments of me collaborating with photo editors. It's been moments of me unlearning and also learning. I never knew that there's somebody in a newsroom called a photo editor. It's been moments of us sitting together with journalists and me asking them, what would it take for you to stop using the image of this 9-month pregnancy or this fetus with angelic wings and God's arms? I assume that those are God's arms, that, or rather, there's usually some hands that glow with a halo. What would it take for you to depict abortion differently? Some of them have come back to me and said, Tabitha, the reason why we use these pictures is because they're free. We don't have a resource, a bank of images that have a positive display of some of these issues, like queer love, right? So we are in the process of actually developing a bank of positive images that we're going to give to anyone who wants to use for their stories, so that you stop depicting using this demonization, these negative images, and start using. So it's sometimes the blame is on the person, but sometimes the media people have come back to me and said, Tabitha, Shutterstock is expensive. I don't have $3 or $10 to download the images, so I use whatever is available online. Yeah.
And I imagine that this is particularly an issue for media houses on the continent, right? But then also, if this is worthwhile doing, surely you will build that bank. But thank you for also taking that initiative, because I think the activists always do is solve problems. Okay, you don't have enough images, here's a free photo bank. So thank you. And Njeri, I'm going to come to you because as Tabitha was speaking, I was imagining that, your safe houses end up being a place for girls like the ones who were marched to the community center. But then I also want to ask you a similar question to what I asked Tabitha. In your work, have you had to engage with the journalists and media houses? Have you come across any practices that you thought were really positive in terms of working with journalists? And I imagine, because it's always easy for us to know the more challenging ones, what would you like to see journalists do better in their reporting around the issues that you work on?
I think for us, it's a mixed bag. I do show up when journalists call me, maybe in the newsroom, maybe in the papers. I show up because I feel it's important for us to not be silent about issues of sexual and gender-based violence. That is one. So I'm always sure, I'm always there, I'm always showing up. That's why I showed up today. Then, one of the issues I have is coverage. How do we cover sensitive issues like sexual and gender-based violence and femicide without journalists sensationalizing the nature of these reports? And I've spoken to journalists and I've asked them, why don't you have coverage? Like, why don't you talk about these things without necessarily, going into the gory details? The beginning of this year, when we started with femicide, and you could see the coverage. The coverage really had a one-angle story. Oh, university girls, oh, young girls are going out, and you could see. And the worst part about it, once they post it like that, those comments are regurgitated by our lawmakers. It becomes a talking point, and you can't change because media is supposed to be responsible for how they speak about these issues. So right now, victims of, they're dead. They have no one to speak for them but us who are still living, have to keep on correcting. This is not why femicide is happening. This is not why this happened. I beg of journalists to kindly, before you print these things, talk to the people on the ground, talk to the people involved and ask, what is the right way I can cover this story without gaslighting the victims, without framing this story in a way that ultimately looks like victim blaming? We need to do better. Do one thing better. Just go out and find out. Once this happens, what really happens? To this story, because you've come, you've seen the dead body, you've done what you need to do, or you've seen this woman was injured, then you just leave the story like that. I know it's up for us to come and pick it up, but do you really do the follow-up? I feel like some of the investigations could be a bit more thorough. In the beginning of the 16 days of activism, Usikimie and Journalists for Human Rights had a roundtable with journalists. And Usikimie, we brought the families of the victims of femicide for them to have a conversation and for them to actually understand how it feels to be on the other side of the table. These are the people you're talking about, their children. These are the ones. And it was a very emotive day. It was very, even for, I think, for the journalist, because just listening to the survivors as well as now the families of femicide, it really gave them a different picture and a different story on how, moving on you can cover. And so I feel like that is it. But we need the stories to be highlighted because as we are, 1 in 3 is one too many. All these women who have died because of femicide are one too many. For me, my prayer is how you cover deaths. We can't normalize that conversation. There should be, a solemnity to it, a decency to it, an understanding of why this is such an important social issue, and not just leave it up to the activist to keep on going about it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Just to say that this is a live recording, so we want you to get involved. I'm going to ask Immanuel a question, and then I'm going to come to you. So get your questions ready. Immanuel, no pressure but pressure.
A lot.
As the only journalist here, I just want to invite you to respond to what Tabitha and Njeri have shared.
Thank you, Nana. I think they're very right on a lot of things they're saying. I've been fortunate enough to move from the worlds of journalism to communication, as well as simple things like photography and videography, which is what Tabitha is talking about, framing of some of these cases. And I'd say they're right in most of the things they're saying, because I'm a Kenyan. I see how all these issues are portrayed in Kenyan media. And I think one of the biggest challenges I've seen with media that we have right now is most journalists are not given the space to follow things and work on things through and through. So what happens is you'll wake up, you'll get into a matatu, you'll go to work, and some editor will just be like, oh, we hear someone died here. Can you go and cover this? Guy will roll up with a camera, be like, oh, this woman was seen walking out late, next she was found dead. So the biggest problem we have is journalists taking time to go behind the headline and to go behind the issues. So with something like femicide, this year we've seen a huge increase in femicide in Kenya. But also when you look at it over the years, it hasn't changed. A lot of the murders we see in Kenya are of women, innocent women just living their lives. And no one is asking, why hasn't the government done anything about this? And we as journalists need to move from that, chasing the headline and fixing the headline or placing a headline, to going behind the covers and saying, okay, what else can be done? You know, holding the government to account. So like this year we saw our president, after all these cases, said a lot of things. We are going to donate this, we are going to give this money, telling cops to stop killing the women, which was very, what are you saying? But the point is, if journalists are not talking about the programs that are going to protect women, the people working in these programs, what else can be done to change the way our society is living and is leading to some of these issues, we'll always be doing the same thing. And this is why you can hear Tabitha saying, someone will come back from the office after doing a story, they'll go on their library, they'll be like, oh, that picture looks nice, I'm gonna take that. And they don't really take the time to look at how can I represent this story better. And I feel like if we had the time to go behind the headlines, to look at what is leading to these things, then we could tell these stories accurately. And for the journalists who are in the room or who are watching and listening, our first season is about activism, and we've talked a lot of activists. And I'd like to say the only way as a journalist you'll report a matter conclusively is by spending time on that story, not waking up, going to do the cover headline, and then going back home. You need to have Njeri on your phone. You need to be calling Njeri every week if you want to accurately report these issues, because there's a lot of issues that go in between the headlines. Like the story Tabitha was saying of Madare, about this lady. You'll find people went and reported about this lady, what happened, but not following up about the way she was treated in court, about the circumstances, about these issues. So this is the biggest problem, and I'd say to editors and journalists who are here, we really need to try and specialize in topics and invest time in topics. You can't be covering sports today and covering femicide tomorrow and cover it conclusively. You can't be doing entertainment news and then wake up on Monday and want to report on corruption. You could do it for the headline, but you're not creating any impact by doing that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for calling out your colleagues and speaking truth to power. So, our wonderful audience, what are the questions you have for these incredible activists we have here and journalists? Okay, my good friend James. Will someone give James a mic, please?
Good evening. Good night.
Good night, James.
First of all, congratulations on the new podcast. I'm going to listen to it. I look forward to listening to it. I want to chat a bit about the media conversation. We were talking about how politicians are correcting what's happening in the media. But have we thought about this? Something I'm especially for you, Njeri. We've noticed that all the media houses are now owned by politicians. There's no single media house that doesn't have political influences. And that means that whatever is in the media house is influenced by the politician. So sometimes we wonder, are we being fair to the journalists? Because there are journalists who want to do the work, but there are these influences from outside of the newsroom. Number two, the journalist who is trying to grow in their career as a journalist will find it very difficult to survive. And I know he knows what I'm saying. Like, as soon as you start being really good as a journalist, let's say you start doing really good stories on activism, normally you suddenly find yourself assigned to what they think are better stories. So you suddenly find yourself, you're a news journalist or a political journalist. And so you find somebody starts out as a very good journalist in one space, and they're moved to become news reporters, or they're on the political desk. And that's something I wanted to know if you can just speak to. Maybe Immanuel can speak to, because it becomes very difficult for you. You find that the really good journalists in this country are not in the newsrooms. They try, they do their job, they hang around, they learn the craft, they learn the trade, and then they are moved on. The newspaper, the news organization decided they're too expensive. They can't afford them. They kind of, I mean, I'm paying this person so much, I can probably pay a younger person maybe like 2 younger people for the same amount of money. So maybe you can speak to it.
Thank you so much, James. And can you guys tell James is a journalist? I think now more in the literary world, has an amazing blog, the James Muria website. It's Right in Africa. Okay, so please check it out. Thank you so much, James. Are there any other questions in the audience? Anything you want to know? Yes. Mike over there.
Yes, Jumbo. Oh, do I stand up? Name is Emmanuel Lee. Not into journalism, but I'm a comms guy. But being in the CSO NGO space, it got to a point where also now the news that we're getting and how issues of sexual reproductive health, are being reported, other than the censure, my Jesus. Anyway, that word, we got to a point and started asking ourselves and now asking the media, is there a way we can have solution-based journalism? And there's a course that's going around now with the Night Center, and among its modules, there's a report that has been released that says, at this point, the young generation, which is the Gen Zs, Akina Alphas, they no longer have trust with the media houses and those who are reporting the news. Meaning also how you would try to make the news, in as much as it's very sad, exciting for me to watch, you're also losing an audience that could do something about it. And also being a consumer of the news, I'm also getting tired of hearing the sad news and then there's nothing that follows. So it's not even much of a question, but rather a comment and maybe a perspective to share. But how could we promote more solution-based journalism? Because right now the source of news, for young people, it is TikTok. For journalists, it's Twitter. For politicians, where they're looking for news now, it's also Twitter. And then for the community, where they are going to look for news, it's Facebook. So as we can see, also that is shifting. No longer the newspapers, no longer the 7 p.m., the 9 p.m. So how can also journalists be influencers? A very good example is Larry Madowo. So how can we make our journalists, because funding is, a big challenge, but how can they step away from the newsroom, get into the streets, and be the voice? Because that, in a way, wouldn't require as much, of the finances, but rather the voice and the trust of the people. But then now also the media houses supporting you being a journalist and now being an influencer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lee. I'll take a final question, and that final question has to be asked by one of my sisters. All right, the sister at the back. Thank you. My sister, Dina.
I was asking my Nana sister. Hi everyone, and thank you to all the panelists. My name is Dina Msindarezo. I come from Rwanda. I live in Kenya, and I've been working on activism. So sisters on the panel, we have crossed paths trying to advance women and girls' human rights. And so I think in my experience, you find that the collaboration between civil society organization and journalists is not necessarily very close. And interaction with journalists has revealed to me that they often say, you ask us to come and cover an issue, but you really don't engage with us as partners. And so I think my question to you is, how do we strengthen the collaboration between civil society organizations, women's rights organizations working on issues of sexual abuse, safe abortion? How do we strengthen that collaboration so that there's actually a collaboration between the journalists and these organizations? And I think it comes to like deepening the knowledge and understanding of the issue so that then they are reporting in the right way. I also feel like it is just not journalists, but also editors, because some journalists will tell you, okay, my story was actually better than this, but my editor wasn't going to publish it the way it is. And so some editing then made it weaker, or, you know, exactly, not create the impact that the journalist was actually trying to put forward. And so for me, I think what is really key is that partnership and collaboration that can deepen knowledge and understanding. I hope you are hearing me, because now I'm at the end.
Thank you so much, Dina. So we've had a number of questions about the fact that media houses are now owned by politicians. Journalists get moved along. They don't get a chance to develop expertise, or, you know, the media houses want to work with younger people who they can afford to, not so much afford to pay, but who they can take advantage of, really, right? There's the recognition that people are going to different sources for their news. You know, how do we deal with that? How can we foster closer collaboration, genuine collaboration between activists and journalists, which is really at the center of the work of IGSC? So really all excellent questions. So I'm going to ask my panel to respond, starting with Immanuel. And, you know, when you respond, also share your final words.
Thank you, Nana. I think the gentleman there has brought up a really important question. You know, like when we were in journalism school in Nairobi, we really used to think, oh, damn, I can't really wait to be on NTV, to be on KTN, to be on K24, which are the major Kenyan news channels. And once you go there, it's a bit of a shock at first, because you basically have to put out everything you've learned in school. The integrity you learned in journalism, you have to put it away and just find a way to apply it on the top, a bit like butter when you're doing your stories. And this was very challenging for me. And it's one of the reasons up to today I don't work in local media and I prefer working freelance, because you can see the influence of the politicians who own the media in the stories. It's not once, it's not twice. When I was working in local media, you do a story, you come back to the office at like 8, it's supposed to be story number 2. You publish it, but you watch the news and the story is not there. And nobody will ever tell you why the story is not there. Another issue I saw in local media, which really drove me away from local media, was the envelope. You know? So it got to a point I realized journalists would only prioritize events where they'd go and come back with a brown envelope. And it was sad that in most cases I saw journalists in media houses earning more from the envelopes than from their salary. So it got to a point where most journalists will depend on this, and they'll not go and cover any stories where they know they can't get the brown envelope. So for a lot of young journalists like me, we've decided to stay away from media houses, especially local media houses. It's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing to be a freelance journalist, like he said. I think he understands that. You have to find a way to be comfortable with your art. You have to find a way to not prioritize money, but prioritize the impact of the stories you want to do. And for most of us, we've just decided we'll stay away from local newsroom. But I have been very happy to see a lot of young journalists go onto different platforms, find different ways to tell these stories. I'll give a good example of someone like John Alan Namu, who went ahead and founded Africa Uncensored, where he can tell stories without the influence of newsrooms, without the influence of politicians, And I don't have to say about the kind of stories you see. They do amazing stories. And this is what I would want to challenge young people who feel like our media stations are not independent, they are being controlled by politicians. We are lucky enough to live in a generation where we have so many platforms. And a good platform is like this, and then what? I haven't done a lot of podcast producing, but I have seen the power of podcasts. I've seen the power of people doing even YouTube channels to tell their stories. So what I would say to any young people, anyone who's feeling like our media is congested with things that we don't want to get involved in, is find a platform, tell your stories. It might be painful for the first few years. There'll be no money, there'll be no one listening, there might be no one talking about your work. But if you focus on a topic and go with it and own your platform, and I think that goes to what the gentleman there was talking about seeing young people on TikTok, on Instagram more, and you're wondering where the journalists are. It's because as journalists now, you have to diversify your platforms. As a journalist, most of the time people ask you, you're a journalist, oh, so where do you work? And if you don't say NTV or BBC or CNN, it becomes a problem. But as a journalist, your work is telling stories. And there's a myriad of ways you can do that. New media has changed in a lot of ways. In this time we live, as one person, you can be a media house. You can be a media house, you can develop content and do content by yourself, thanks to things like AI, thanks to all these platforms we have. And I'd like to tell, especially young journalists in Kenya, because we're living in a generation where we are seeing censorship coming back, where we're seeing politicians being involved more in the stories. And it's not going to end, you know? Organizations and people like this who are this powerful rarely back down. They'll dial up the pressure and what they're doing. So as journalists, what we have to do is diversify where we put our work, diversify the kind of stories you're telling, even if it's through the same topic and theme. Try and find other areas to tell that story. Don't feel like you have to go and work in that media house where you know there's a politician who owns it and they change the stories.
Thank you so much, Immanuel. I think he deserves a round of applause. Find a platform and tell your story. That really resonates. Thank you. And Njeri, how do you think we can actually foster meaningful collaboration between journalists and activists without needing the brown envelope?
I wouldn't even afford a brown envelope. Yeah. I feel like tell your stories authentically. There is a way you can tell your story, even though from everything I have heard, there is a lot of political machinations and maybe leanings and inclinations in the world of media. But I feel like when it comes to issues of gender-based violence, educate yourself. Be trauma-informed, be gender-sensitive. Understand the context of what you are going to say and how that, when you say it, how does it affect the people who read it? And how does it affect the way that content will be regurgitated by, say, for example, politicians? Because unfortunately, we live in a country where you can see the continuum of violence, right? It keeps on going on and on and on and on. There has to be a place where you're like, let me be accountable. If I'm going to be reporting on issues of gender, what if I kept data of all the women who have been killed? What if I start asking myself, when the president said, I'm giving 100 million, where did the 100 million actually, what did he mean? Because I actually asked that question the other day when I was on media and asked, when he said he gave 100 million, who did he give the money to? What was the money for? Where was the budget? And can we see where the money went? And the CS for gender, not the CS, we don't have one. The PS for gender couldn't answer, and neither could the senator who was supposed to answer that. So those are questions I expect to see, people asking. Calling truth to power, sometimes it's scary, but that is how you start fostering meaningful collaboration. When you start talking these things and just putting them out there, even though you're afraid, speak it anyway.
Yeah, speak it even though you're afraid. Thank you. Thank you. Tabitha, you have the final word today.
Pressure. The drinks have chilled. Champagne has popped. Cars is in the house. Woo-woo! I'm going to try and be a storyteller. Just before Trump was elected, those of you who were here when they were showing sampling the podcast, Njeri Wa Migwi called me and said, Tabitha, I'm doing a story that is going to be aired in America for PBS, and I need to interview you. And I put on my best suit, my lipstick. I drove to where Njeri was, and I spent almost 3 hours with her doing the interview over and over again. This was going to be on American news. It was going to be aired on November 4th, right? For those of you who know, the elections were on 5th. I stood a chance to be on PBS. So I was deeply committed to this. Good people. On 5th morning, Njeri writes to me and says, Tabitha, I am so sorry to let you know that the editors gave me, out of all the people I interviewed, they gave me just 8 minutes for this story to run, and they cut it just where your story starts. So I'm sorry to tell you that you are not going to be airing on PBS in America. All right? Of course I was deflated, right? I'm not looking for fame, just to be clear, but this was a chance for me to share with an American audience what the impact of Trump's re-election would have. At least in my head, I thought I would have a chance to convince an American audience. My solutions, now coming back to your question, are not based on what the media should do for me as an activist, but what I can do for the media. Njeri was so embarrassed, and I told her, no, listen, I will come to you again and again and again each time you need me, because this work does not stop with just PBS. So to the activists who are in the room, sometimes we get deflated because you've been interviewed 10 times by Immanuel and you've got fed up because your story never features, and he keeps on saying, I'm sorry, my editor removed your name from the people that I interviewed. To the activists who are doing this work, don't get tired of offering your time each time a journalist calls upon you. The second thing is that we are busy as activists. And this is a solution that I have practiced, which is co-curate a list with that journalist of plan B, plan C, plan D, of people who can speak like you, who know the issues like you, so that when you're not available and you are at CSW in New York, James Smart has 4 other people that you have given him that he can interview on the same issue, right? Emmanuel Lee, you asked for solutions-oriented dialogues. Here it is, right? So as the journalist who is here, do not over-rely on Tabitha. Insist to Tabitha and say, I need you to tell me when you're not available, who else can I go to, so that you co-curate that list and it's readily available. It's not just 2 names. It's 10 people who know about gender-based violence and femicide, such that if Njeri is not available, you do it. And the third solution that I have is based on my own experience. The journalists, just like police officers, suffer. They have no resources, right? And that's why, the good ones leave. To the Kenyan audience, I'm thinking about Asha Mwilu. Asha Mwilu now has debunked media. She's no longer on our TV stations. I'm thinking about Dr. Mercy Korir. Mercy Korir has created Willow Health Change Platform. The good ones leave because they're frustrated. So where you have an opportunity, I'm preaching, say yeah, man! For those of you who have an opportunity to resource the media. Share that open bank of 100 photos with them and say, I have given you this resource so that you don't have to always rely on me, right? So that those 100 photos of beautiful queer love will act as a resource for them and say, it's an open source. Give it out to everybody who needs it, right? So where there are grants to be given, because I do know that there are opportunities, forward them to those journalists who you know have been doing a wonderful job. Let them apply, recommend them, right? Those of us who have connections in philanthropy, recommend these journalists for those grants that open up so that you keep motivating them to tell your stories. So it can't be that we're always insisting to the journalists and saying, show up, come and follow me, shadow me, talk about my issues. It also has to be that we recognize that they are completely starved. Many of the journalists, at least from my experience with the Kenyan journalists, is that they are frustrated, they are completely starved, they will, be sent for beat and patrol. This guy is going to have some tear gas in his head, and then he's going to be asked tomorrow to cover femicide, and then the next day he's going to be shipped to cover politicians in parliament. So where you can, resource them, believe in them, invest in them, keep checking on them and giving them those opportunities to have those spaces to better themselves. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Tabitha. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And help me thank you yourselves here in the audience. You've been a beautiful audience. I'm going to ask you to pull out your phone. I want to see the phones. And go to your favorite podcast platform and search for And Then What. Please follow. And even if you haven't yet listened, rate us a 5. Because that is the way we get the word out. That's how we get a following. Please download our podcasts, have a listen, make a comment, share it with your friends. I want to say a huge thank you for joining us today and for being at the very, very first live conversation of And Then What. Hopefully we can do so much more. Thank you, you've been beautiful. Thank you.